historic ethnic identity, you can go back and be a citizen. I think even Ireland, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, it's a very different way of looking at it. I wish that our history was such that we didn't have this compelling need, but it's something which I feel is somebody who my wife's parents were Holocaust survivors, and I am very happy that they have a place they can go to now. I think that's today. I think that's something that's important. Please.
Well, I wasn't going to ask it quite in this way, but I've been very concerned about population worldwide for some time. Oh, Gloria Purcell,
yeah,
and I'm currently on the county council for the Green Party here.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for coming.
And so is Sanda, and so is Jim there, and so is Mark, and let's see. Anyway, the population problem. Suppose, given your concern for refugees from elsewhere in the world for making Israel a Jewish state, how would you deal with, first you've got a growing population already, which you're going to have to tackle somehow, and then how would you deal with the refugee situation if you got a flood of refugees in addition to your growing population? Tell me what the green vision is, if you have any specifics for dealing with population. I know that here it's going to be, people have been avoiding the elephant in this room for a long time.
It is the elephant.
And it tackles religious issues and a lot of other things head on. And it's been very difficult to even bring it up. Yep. So I would like some help.
Well, I'll say two things. There's two different refugee issues. I think that because of our historic circumstances, it would be, often I say that, societies, people, and even political parties are sometimes defined by their inconsistencies. And so on this particular issue, there is absolutely no way that I could be a member of a party that didn't say our doors are open if there is a Jew who's persecuted and feels he needs a haven, that Israel has that. Otherwise, how can we justify all the other casualties that this state created? So in that sense, we have I think if we look demographically today, the big migrations may be over, although there could be some things from Europe. But there's another problem which I feel also compelled to deal with. Israel is the first Western country, the closest Western country in the world to Africa. And the word is out. And we have people knocking on our door. Some of them are economic refugees, people looking for a better place, but some of them are political refugees from Darfur, okay? And as somebody with a past who has been the victim of persecution, Israel, I think, has a moral obligation to reach out and help these people. And it's hard, we have now parts of Tel Aviv where it's, I think something like 60,000 Africans living in southern Tel Aviv. And people who live there don't feel comfortable with that many people who don't speak the language. Sometimes there's violence, drinking, whatever. And so we have to figure out what is a responsible policy, both to Israelis who need resources, but also to reach out and help the world. Having said all that, I think that the one area we can surely have a role is in the issue of what we would call pronatal policies. Israel subsidizes big families in all sorts of ways. And it's almost this crazy thing. If you have one child, you get several hundred shekels, 300 shekels a month. If you have two, you get 700. Like, you get more for each kid progressively. When we all know that when you have children, the second child is cheaper than the first because they get the hand-me-downs. But it's not that. It sends a message. And, at one time in 1950, this kind of policy made sense because there were 1 million people in Israel. It was very unpopulated. The world was questioning the sovereignty, and they needed to create demographic facts, needed to encourage large families. But that's no longer the case. And I think that I certainly condemn the kind of policies you have in a place like China, whatever, but there are ways through economic incentives that you can encourage people to be responsible. And the present policies are such that if you have large children, it's a bonanza. You make a lot of money. And that, I think, causes problems. Environment. I'd love if we could do that, because I think there's something wonderful about big families, and it's part of Jewish tradition. But I live in a country that's very small, and it's starting to get very crowded. And I feel that's a responsibility. So, I mean, there's little things. For example, if you have 6 children, you don't have to serve in the military reserve. So I have friends who had 5 kids, I will have a 6th, and I won't have to serve in the military reserve. These are these sort of, we call perverse incentives. So I'd say first get rid of the perverse incentives. Let's start with that, you know. We will, if you want child support, up to 3 children. But at that point, I think we can cut that off.
Do you have a religious problem with family planning, the way we do here with the
well,
Christian right?
You have to. Every rabbi might have a different opinion. Certainly, if you look in the Talmud, which is the sort of the basis of Jewish law, there was a discussion about this, and the 2 great rabbis of the period of time, Hillel and Shammai, said that 2 children is enough. Hillel said as long as you have 2 sons. Shammai said it could be a male and a female. But I would argue that there's many other laws. One that says that in times of famine you are relieved of the first commandment, responsibilities to be fruitful and multiply, the first commandment in the Bible from Genesis. So I would think that in a situation in Israel it would be very easy to interpret. Surely we know that before there were these massive incentives, the most religious families in Israel still had 3 to 4 children, and not like today where they have 10 to 12. And I think that's public policy. That's not religion per se. We can go into greater detail, but yes, it's sensitive, and it's something which will raise not only hackles, but in a society that's already teeming over, and we're also very, very. But I think that you have to be honest and you have to be fair, and I feel that I am betraying my commitment to my children and grandchildren if I don't start raising these issues now, because population momentum and stuff that you have to start dealing with soon. Certainly if we want to have any space in the country for the creatures of the land and the biodiversity, I haven't even gotten into that, we have to start drawing some lines down.
Yep.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Mike Cajano, PSAC. It seems like so many of the really worthy efforts are all stymied or put on hold with the lack of a peace process. And best from where we're sitting, this continued settlement building and the lack of a freeze is pretty much a cynical non-starter. I mean, I don't see how you can expect anyone to negotiate when you say, as we negotiate, I'm taking, So it's just, how you guys, and even this country, cannot make that more of an issue.
Well, it's an issue. I mean,
I'm not making it enough of an issue, because, how do you start a negotiation? I mean, I can't believe ecologically this wall running serpentine through all that territory is an ecological nightmare.
It certainly has been very, very bad for fragmentation of open spaces, and I'm not happy with it. However, it seems to work. If you look at the numbers pre and post wall in terms of the terror victims, there was 250 people dying every year from being blown up by buses, and that doesn't happen today. So it's an impossible dilemma. But my own view is that yes, I think that the expansion of settlements is, for us, it would be a reason not to join the present government. In other words, if I was a member of Parliament today, I would not be a member of this government. I would be in opposition just on that issue alone. Even though I think in the end you could, it doesn't have to be. And nothing else. Look, we froze settlements for 8-9 months, and they still wouldn't sit down and talk to us. So what do you want? And I think that was a tactical error by the Palestinians, and they had an opportunity. There's this,
Is it a good thing to keep feeding and subsidizing folks to move over there? I mean,
it's a horrible thing.
Would you need that wall if they weren't there?
Look, the interesting thing, first of all, I've been going to rallies against the occupation since I got out of the army when I was 22 years old. So in that sense, I think my personal record, and I think our party's position, this is very clear, that the settlements constitute a major obstacle to peace, and it's one which we could not be part of the government that actively encouraged and funded this. An interesting phenomenon, if we at least trying to think about what might get us beyond that, is that one of the changes in the settler population is a new movement of settlers who say, we just want to live in the land of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We would be very happy to give back, as part of a solution, we'd be willing to stay here within a Palestinian state. There's, like we heard, 20% of Israeli citizens are Arab. Why can't the Palestinian state have some Jews in it? I don't think that's a majority, it's a small group, but it's starting to be a growing number of people who are raising this as a possibility. I would welcome that kind of flexibility. I think that ultimately to get beyond the present impasse, we need to really be thinking outside the box in all kinds of ways, both in terms of the that they're talking about connecting Gaza and the West Bank with a tunnel, all these kind of things. I just think it's very discouraging that the peace process is stalled, and the Prime Minister has built himself a coalition which basically locks him in, and he's very happy to do it. Some people say until his father does. His father just turned 100 and is a very right-wing man. Until he passes on, he could never give back the West Bank because he could never look his father in the eye with his ideology. I think he has a responsibility to do something bold, and right now this treading water and the fact that everything that seems to be okay and he's still in power, that's not a solution. I think time is working against us, and we have the situation with Iran, which is extremely discouraging. I think that moving the peace process forward would do a lot to diffuse that particular front, which would be good for the whole world, not just for Israel. So on this issue, I certainly think it's a problem, but I would make the point, for me politically, that people aren't going to vote for a Green Party because we're going to be the most radical anti-settlement party. There's already many parties that make that their primary identity. We would agree with what they're doing, but we try to add other messages as well. So you have another question, then, yes, sir.
Yeah, I got my own question, but I wanted to follow up the previous one, which is about, I'm sorry, Graz, about allowing Jews to come to Israel to immigrate. What you've been talking about is that people are allowed sanctuary because they're in danger in their own home. But I thought it was true that any American Jew could go to Israel.
That's true, of course.
And they're not being, well, generally they're not being persecuted here.
No, I don't think they've been persecuted at all.
So then my own question is, how do you feel about the blockade of the boats trying to go to Gaza from where the Free Gaza boats?
I think that the Free Gaza, the Israeli policy was a public relations fiasco, but I think you have a situation where you have a radical Islamic regime which is dedicated to destroy our country. It doesn't just say it, but does everything it can to kill citizens whenever they can. And if that was the situation in San Diego, which was getting bombed by Mexico, I don't think that people here would question whether the U.S. had a right to blockade Mexico if they were bombing the people there and leaving and targeting children and targeting schools, as has been done. So I'm very on that issue. I tend to be a little bit more less compromising. I think that now it's a non-issue because Egypt's opened the border, whatever. But I think it was very important for the more moderate Palestinian camp that is willing, at least in theory, to talk about negotiations, that is not willing to put pressure on that Islamic government and show that there's some incentive. Because the second that when we had this big prisoner exchange, the stock of Hamas and the radical Islamic Party went way up, and the more secular, more moderate Fatah Party went down with the public. And that's something we need to think about as well, what kind of activity we want to reward. I just want to tell one story. That I'm friendly with a guy named Nitzan Horowitz, who's the only openly gay member of Israel's Knesset. He's a member of the Meretz Party. And he was talking about the war in Gaza that took place a few years ago. And he said, my party at the time was very much against the Israeli invasion of Gaza. And he said, but I couldn't take part in that because I was getting all kinds of text messages and emails from lesbians and homosexuals in Gaza saying, please liberate us from this Taliban nightmare, that our life is unbearable. And there is such a thing as having regimes which are not good regimes. So from my understanding of what it's like to live in Gaza, to be a woman who would like to have basic political rights, to voice an opinion which might be different than that of the government's, they take their political opponents and they shoot them in the knees, and that's the lucky ones. So this is a regime which I think is very problematic, and I don't mind. I think there's be all kinds of things we should do. But the second they start shooting at me on a regular basis, or letting militias shoot at me and killing my citizens, I have a responsibility to my citizens to defend them.
Well, but my